Hi everyone, welcome to ProFusion 2020. My name is Luke and I'm a specialist at Canon Canada, and today I'm going to be talking about our newest Cinema EOS camera and the first to use our new mirrorless RF mount. I'm talking of course about the Canon C70. We announced the C70 back in September, and just by looking at it you can tell it's quite different from our other Cinema EOS cameras. Given its price, performance, and new features, there's a lot to be excited about. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and what better place to start than the foundation of any camera? I'm talking of course about the sensor. The C70 comes equipped with a 4K Super 35 size sensor that can produce 16 plus stops of dynamic range. It can do this thanks to our newly developed DGO sensor technology. DGO stands for dual gain output and should not be confused with dual native ISO, which is a separate technology altogether. Dual gain output works by having each photodiode record an image twice. One readout is for prioritizing saturation in the highlights of an image, while the second readout prioritizes lower noise levels in the shadows. With those two signals, the camera blends the results to achieve an image with high dynamic range and low noise. To ensure that there's no temporal artifacting that can sometimes be found in other methods of HDR video acquisition, both of these readouts are done simultaneously. The dual gain output feature is available in frame rates up to 60 frames per second. Reading two separate signals simultaneously from the same photodiode might ring a bell to a few of you out there, and for good reason. This might sound similar to how our famous dual pixel autofocus works to deliver incredibly accurate and reliable autofocus. But make no mistake, dual gain output and dual pixel autofocus are separate technologies. The good news is that they will work in tandem, allowing you to achieve 16 plus stops of dynamic range with incredible autofocus performance. For those of you with a little bit more experience with our most recent cinema cameras, all this might sound a little familiar, and there's a good reason for that. The DGO sensor was first debuted only a few months ago when it launched in our highly acclaimed C300 Mark III. The fact that the C70 shares the same sensor as the C300 Mark III is exciting for a few reasons. Yes, with the price of the C70 being about half the cost of a new C300 Mark III, it's more accessible to more shooters. But it also means that the C70 and C300 Mark III will work incredibly well as a duo, with the colors and performance that match impeccably well, given that the images are captured from two different camera models. From this sensor, you'll be able to record 4K DCI 10-bit 422 footage up to 120 frames per second without cropping the sensor, and now with audio recording options in Canon's well-established XF AVC format with bit rates up to 410 megabits per second. If you need even higher frame rates, the C70 is capable of recording 180 frames per second in 2K or Full HD resolutions when cropping the sensor in the Super 16 mode. The C70 is also capable of recording in different formats. This includes an H.265 compression that will allow for much more efficient media storage without additional loss in quality that's often associated with heavier compression. Of course, H.264 compression is also available. The C70 can record all of this to its dual SD card slots, which will give shooters the ability to mix and match recording options in a wide variety of ways, including XFAVC, MP4, and proxy recordings in many different combinations. As I mentioned earlier, the C70 is the first Cinema EOS camera to make use of our new mirrorless RF mount. Now, this is exciting for a few reasons. First, and most obviously, we now have a Cinema EOS camera that can make use of all our new and exciting RF lenses, like the 15-35 f2.8L, or the unparalleled 28-70 f2L, or even the freshly released 50 f1.8. But it's not just the RF lenses that make the RF mount so appealing. It's the flexibility of options. Let me explain. By now, many of you are probably familiar with our lineup of EF lens adapters for the RF system. With over 1 million Canon EF lenses produced, there's no shortage of options available. However, with the C70, we've developed a fourth lens adapter specifically designed for this camera, the new focal reducer adapter. The optical elements in this new adapter will help optimize the full-frame image circle projected by your full-frame EF lenses to an image circle that's more appropriately sized for the Super 35 size sensor found in the C70. The end result is the ability to capture footage that more closely resembles full-frame results, including depth of field of view, and low light performance. This is achieved by resizing the image circle that a full-frame lens will project onto the Super 35 sensor. A full-frame lens is designed to have an image circle that covers full-frame sensors, of course. But when used on a Super 35 sensor, the light transmitted through the lens will extend past the sensor's reach. This is where the focal reducer gets its name, by refocusing all of that wasted light back onto the image sensor instead of around it. To help explain this, let's use an example. Say we wanted to use the EF 100mm f2.8L macro lens on the C70. With one of our other 3 existing adapters, this isn't a problem. But on a Super 35 size sensor, your field of view will change in accordance to the crop factor of the sensor, which in the case of Super 35 is roughly 1.5 times, which means that if you multiply the focal length by the crop factor, your field of view will be equivalent to about 150 millimeters if it was on a full-frame sensor. The focal reducer will optimize the lens's image circle for a Super 35 size sensor, which will affect the image circle projected by the lens by a factor of 0.71 times. So if we go through the full equation, 100 millimeters, the focal length of the lens, times 1.5, the crop factor of Super 35 sensors, times 0.71, the focal reduction of the adapter, we'll get about 106 millimeters, much closer to the original full-frame field of view that this lens was designed for. By refocusing the light coming through the lens back onto the sensor, we effectively regain some of the light's full light transmission potential. A simple way to sum this up is to say that you regain about a stop of exposure from your full-frame EF lenses, letting you get shallower depth of field and better low light performance than you would otherwise achieve with a full-frame lens on a Super 35 size sensor. The end result is an image that very closely resembles full-frame results. I hope that helps explain just how adaptable the C70 is in terms of lens selection and performance, but we're not going to stop there. Because the C70 shares a feature in common with its bigger siblings, the C300 Mark III and C500 Mark II, and that's the ability to support anamorphic shooting. The C70 can de-squeeze anamorphic lenses for monitoring, either through its rear LCD or HDMI output, and it can do this in anamorphic de-squeeze factors of either 2 times or 1.3 times. But the C70 also shares another feature in common with its bigger Cinema EOS siblings, and that's electronic image stabilization. This feature will add a slight crop to the image to provide exceptional image stabilization that will work in tandem with the optical image stabilization of supported lenses. This feature is even available in lenses that don't offer electronic communication to your camera, such as vintage or legacy lenses. All you have to do is tell the camera what focal length your lens is, and the camera will do the rest. It can even perform this function with anamorphic lenses. So to sum it up, C70 users will have more creative flexibility and freedom in their lens selection, more than they've ever had in a Cinema EOS camera before. And while we're on the topic of the RF mount, now might be a good time to bring up the brand new internal ND system found in the C70. If you've used our Cinema EOS cameras before, you'll know they typically come equipped with a variety of internal NDs ranging from 2, 4, and 6 stops of internal ND, and then expanding to 8 and 10 stops, allowing shooters to shoot wide open apertures even in the brightest conditions. However, with the C70, we've had to redesign the ND system to fit in the much smaller flange distance found in the RF mount. And while we were there, retooling the ND filter array, we managed to make some improvements. With our previous cinema cameras, you would have to cycle through each ND filter to get to your desired setting. But now you can skip straight to whichever ND setting you want immediately, and with faster activation to boot. You can do this and a whole lot more from the newly designed touch menu on the C70's LCD screen. There are 2 sections found within the new touch menus. First, you have quick access to options like neutral density filters, color temperature, and monitor assist functions like zebras, focus peaking, and false color. The other section of the new touch menu gives you fast access to the most sought-after recording settings like video format, frames per second, and slow and fast motion recording modes. We've made other improvements to the user interface as well, including the ability to switch to a vertical shooting mode with the touch of one of the C70's 13 assignable buttons. In the vertical shooting mode, the user interface on the touch LCD will reorient itself vertically. This ability will make it much easier to record vertically on set. The ability to quickly and easily record vertical content is rapidly becoming a highly sought-after feature in professional cameras. This is because the demand for professional-grade content on social media and any platform designed to be viewed on a cell phone or tablet is only increasing. To further help users produce this type of content, we've also included a mounting point on the grip, so the camera can be mounted vertically to your tripod or gimbal without any other accessories required. And while we're looking at the exterior of the camera, let's have a closer look at some of these inputs and outputs. First, we have two mini XLR audio inputs. By not opting for the traditional full-sized XLR inputs found on our other cinema cameras, we were able to keep the size of the C70 as small as possible. But don't worry, you'll be able to adapt all your full-size XLR audio equipment with fairly inexpensive third-party adapters. With the small footprint of the C70, you might be wondering where the physical audio controls are. Well, all the audio controls you'd expect to find on a cinema camera are located behind the fully articulating 3.5-inch rear LCD screen. Next, we have the standard 3.5mm microphone input and headphone jacks. Then there's a 2.5mm remote A terminal to help support devices like the Canon RCV100 remote controller, followed by the full-sized HDMI Type A connection capable of outputting the full 4K DCI resolution of the sensor. You'll also notice the USB-C connection there as well. This will be used to support third-party attachments like wireless file transmitters and Ethernet connections. Finally, on the opposite side of the camera, you'll find the timecode input and output connection to help you integrate the C70 into larger or more complex shooting environments. And finally, let's take a look at this battery. The C70 uses the BPA30, the same battery used in many of our other cinema cameras. With this battery, you'll be able to achieve anywhere between 170 and 205 minutes of continuous recording time, depending on the mode used. With this battery, and depending on the recording mode, you'll be able to achieve 170 to 205 minutes of continuous recording time. If you opt to use the larger BPA60 battery, you'll be able to record up to 350 to 415 minutes continuously, depending on the recording mode used. Normally, Profusion gives us the opportunity to meet each other in person, and it gives you the opportunity to get your hands on some of our equipment to see how it feels and performs. Of course, this year had to be a little bit different, unfortunately, but I still wanted to give you a sense of the size and weight of the C70. The C70 measures about 13 centimeters tall, 16 centimeters wide, and just under 12 centimeters deep. The body of the camera weighs in at 1.17 kilograms, or just 2.6 pounds. For comparison's sake, let's put the C70 up against the size of both the 1DX Mark III and the C200. The C200 is, of course, already one of our smallest and lightest Cinema EOS cameras. Given its features and performance, I think you'll agree that its small size and weight is pretty impressive. A great thing about Profusion is that it always gives you the opportunity to ask us any questions you might have about our cameras, lenses, or printers. We didn't want that to change, even though we had to go digital this year. So we took to social media and asked you what your questions were about the C70. Here are a few of those questions. It's a Thing Imagery asks, does it shoot externally to have a higher bit depth of 12-bit? Well, by using the HDMI output, you will be able to record to an external drive. However, you will not be able to get 12-bit video from the C70. If you need something more than 10-bit 422 for your work, I'd recommend taking a look at the C200, which right now is the same price as the C70 and can record 12-bit 4K Cinema Raw Light internally. If you want both the DGO sensor found in the C70 and the ability to record RAW, I'd recommend taking a look at the C300 Mark III, which can do both those things and has a lot of other upgrades to it. iKosh Visual asks, why no viewfinder? In the case of the C70, some of our priorities for this camera were to keep the size, weight, and maybe most importantly the cost as low as possible, which means no EVF on this model. However, by using the HDMI output, you should have no problem adapting a third-party EVF to this camera if that better suits your personal shooting style. Many people, including Denise Perspective, asked, how much will it cost in Canadian dollars? The C70 costs $7,299 Canadian. Our next question comes from Ed Matt, who asks, can you shoot extreme low light with it? Thanks for the great question, Ed. And yes, absolutely. With the C70's DGO sensor, you should have no problem recording very clean shadow detail, so low light shouldn't be an issue for you. We were also asked by a number of people who the C70 is designed for. And that's a good question, because when we design a new product, any new product, we have to understand who we're trying to appeal to and who we're designing it for. In the case of the C70, I think we're going to appeal to a lot of broadcasters, documentarians, and corporate shooters. However, I also want to add that when we release new cameras, I often find myself pretty surprised about where these cameras end up and what kind of projects they're shooting. So in the end, I can't tell you who's going to end up using this camera and what for. I think the creative community has to show us what this camera really can do. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you found that useful. And be sure to check out some of the other content we've put up for ProFusion 2020. If you have any other questions about our cinema cameras, be sure to check out the Cinema EOS Buyer's Guide on the Canon Canada website. Until next time, thanks for joining me again, and take care.